Welcome to the Managing Violence podcast, where we talk all things self-defense, violence prevention, and aggression management. My name is Joe Saunders. I'm your host. Let's go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Managing Violence podcast. It's a long one today, so I'm not going to ramble very much. I've got Schulte Schrepping on the line. He has a very interesting story. He's not a typical guest. He's not a martial artist. He is a manager or owner of a security company in Toowoomba in Queensland. But he's also got some very interesting academic pedigree when it comes to managing violence at the community level and how his organisation goes about managing alcohol-fueled violence in their workplace. So Kurt's got some really, really interesting insights. If you've never heard of him, give it a chance. He's a great guy, very fun to listen to, and you'll get a lot out of this one. It's not a martial arts podcast. This is talking about violence at a different level, about what we can do to manage alcohol-fueled violence and what we can do as a community to make sure that our communities are safer and everyone can enjoy a night out. So without further ado, here is Kurt. G'day, Kurt. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, mate. It's a pleasure to finally get you on. We started trying to organise this about midway through season 1, and here we are midway through season 2. We finally made it happen.
Yeah, mate. It's been a long journey for both of us, but I think it's a positive thing, mate. We've both been very busy with work and life, so it's been delayed, but for good reason. But it's finally good to finally sit down and have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And I'm really looking forward to this one because we've talked a lot offline about you're not one of my typical guests, and that's it's funny. I never actually intended to have a typical guest. I never wanted the podcast to be all about martial artists. It's just looking into the community, but who's doing what, and the martial artists tend to have the highest profile. So it was really nice to have this recommendation come in from our mutual friend Rob Giuffrida. Who, as I mentioned to you offline, the first time I met Rob, he was choking me unconscious not quite unconscious. I think I tapped out just in time in a submission grappling competition about 10 years ago. And but he works for you, which is fantastic. So, mate, just for the sake of listeners who have no idea who you are, which I'm going to assume is probably the majority of people,
absolutely,
but through no fault of your own, here we are. We're about to make you famous. You're a superstar. You'll be in demand. Mate, Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink will be knocking on your door in the next 2 weeks. Let's give the listeners I keep trying to say readers. I'm not sure why I keep wanting to refer to people listening to a podcast as readers, but let's give the listeners a bit of an introduction to you. Tell us a little bit about your story. You're not a martial artist. You're not someone who comes to us with a whole bunch of you got a little bit of real experience being with what you've done, but I won't spoil that story. But you're not coming at it from a martial arts angle. You're actually dealing with violence in a much different way. So I'll let you tell your story about how you got to where you are and what your particular interest is.
Yeah, sure, mate. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to have the chat today and to talk about this stuff because, as you alluded to, I'm not as well known as many of your other guests, and for good reason. I mean, those people are highly regarded authors, and in fact, I sit and listen as a fan of the podcast a lot of the time. So, look, it's been great. But my story began about 14 years ago, and listening to your own kind of reminded me of a little bit. I was a big guy looking for an industry. I'd just moved towns. I'd moved from Alice Springs to Toowoomba, which is my hometown now, and I was looking for a job. And I came across someone who was starting a new nightclub in town. And I managed to sit down and I was able to have a bit of a chat with them. I didn't know what sort of work I was going to do in the area. I'd actually put in applications for bank jobs for the most part to go into finance because I thought, that's a good, not something that I love, but it would be a good career path. But I needed money immediately. Happened to be a big guy. So someone who ran a nightclub actually came to me and said, "Oh, look, who I knew through a mutual friend," and they said, "Well, we're actually looking for guys at the moment. I know someone who's employing crowd controllers. Is that an industry that you think you'd be you'd be keen on doing or joining. And I actually lied because I was shitting my pants at the time when they asked that, because you have this idea that you've got to be someone that fights every weekend, and my experience with fighting at that point were a couple of schoolyard scuffles and one fight in the street. And that was it. That was the entirety of my experience. And he actually asked me the question like 14 years ago. This is what he said. He said, "Can you fight?" Of course, I lied about that as well. Said, "Yeah, no problem."
Well, mate, to be honest, if you're a young male, you think you can fight anyway. It doesn't matter.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Especially when you're a big guy. I was 6'3", 126 kilos or something like that. And I'm like, well, I probably can. It's something that you can do when you're a young man, right? How hard can it be? Turns out it's very hard. As I got into it many years later.
It's like asking a young bloke if he put sausage on the barbecue.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, easy. No, everybody can do it. It's a human universal, right? Like it's
of course I can reverse the What are you talking
about? But that's it. And I told him that I could and that I wanted work. And the truth was that I did want work and I needed work. So I got enrolled into a security course, a Certificate 3 in Security Operations, which at the time was 3 6-hour days. As you're probably aware of, back over a decade ago, the course was definitely not as rigorous as it is now, and the requirements certainly weren't what they are now, and that has many pros and cons, and that's a discussion that we could go into way down the track. But I did my 3 6-hour days, bit of first aid, a few restraints at the end, a little bit of legislation, and I got my certificate. I applied for my license, and 3 weeks later it came. And that weekend I started work. I started work out at the Chinchilla RSL, was where I first did my first gig as a crowd controller. And I had a lot of construction out there. And, I learned a lot on that first night. There was actually a big fight that occurred, and I did nothing. It turns out that's not the best course of action when you're a crowd controller.
It's not a good way to get to come back. No.
It's not a good way. And I certainly, but again, it was a learning experience. They talked to me afterwards and I kind of froze up. And that's something that, going into it, I talk to my guys regularly about now, is that's a fairly sort of normal reaction for most people going into the industry. When they first see something, a violent situation occur, they really don't know how to handle it. Even if they're not afraid, they may be scared to get their hands dirty, so to speak.
Absolutely,
or what would be the consequences?
I think sorry to cut you off.
That's okay.
Cut you off. I think what you're saying there is incredibly valid, and I'm mindful not to interrupt too much during your introduction, or else we'll spend the entire podcast doing an introduction. But what you said there about freezing, even though you're not scared, I've seen that run people out of the industry, because there's this like macho feeling that if you freeze, you must be scared, and really what it is you are not accustomed to dealing with the massive rush of adrenaline and hormones that is flooding your system right now. Because
that's exactly right.
If you're not used to being in that, then you don't know that feeling, and that feeling is incredibly disorientating. And
that's right.
And you can feel like you're underwater, like your legs are made of concrete, and you just can't do anything. And then to make matters worse, the other blokes that are more comfortable with it look at you like you're a pussy. And
that's right.
Will often tell you that you're a pussy, and then rather than overcome that, if you don't have the right mentor to sort of guide you through it, a lot of people will just quit and go, "Well, I'm not cut out for it. I guess I just wasted my couple of $1,000 doing my course of license."
Yeah. Absolutely. And look, it really, I remember it goes back to what you said on your one of your initial podcasts about the hierarchy, and experience is ahead of technique. It's far more important when it comes to dealing with these situations. And I give my guys a bit of a pep talk when they start. Whenever I get the opportunity to say, look, it's going to happen. If I make them aware of it as well, generally they have to come to our training sessions. And again, I'm kind of getting my head of myself here where we're talking about this, but we do a lot of scenario training and try and get them as ready as possible for those situations. And even if they do freeze up due to fear, that's okay too. I still feel fear in large situations because I don't want to get hurt. It's a totally normal experience in an environment that can seem uncontrolled at certain times. So it's really important that we understand that and we establish that. Of course, back then when I started, I wasn't aware of that, and I did, I was placing those stereotypes, and I wasn't a thuggish security guard. I definitely used communication and de-escalation naturally, and I may have been seen, as we talked about it, I may have been seen as a pussy when I started out, not because I wouldn't get involved. I certainly learned that side of it, but because I didn't throw down at the first opportunity, and that was partially because I didn't know how to do that stuff. But so over the coming 2.5 years, from that point, from my first shift, I worked for the one company, and I gained some great experience and great insights into the industry. Now, I did that. I was a weekend warrior, Friday, Saturday nights. I did get a job at a bank, and I worked full time, and I worked Friday, Saturday nights as well. And I did that for several years. So I did 2.5 years with one company, and eventually I'd gotten a fairly decent reputation at that point as a de-escalation crowd controller in the city that I worked in Toowoomba, and I was approached by a new nightclub to come and be the head of security for them in-house. They were paying me.
Tell me, how did your bank colleagues view you bouncing on the weekends? I imagine there weren't a lot of bank workers that were getting into fistfights on the weekends.
Yeah, look, it was a very interesting thing. They certainly, they enjoyed the stories that came from the weekends. I think that when I got to work on a Monday, they would routinely be like, "Oh, can you tell us what occurred?" Because I think that they were, they enjoy the excitement. Everybody enjoys the excitement and the action of the stories that you hear on that, from that world. Because it is, if you're not involved in it, it's a foreign world. It's a different universe to you. Now, look, I can honestly say that I haven't kept in touch with a great deal of people that I work with at the bank, because we didn't have a huge amount in common. I had far more in common with the guys that I work with on the weekend. There was an interesting thing that working at the bank, how it was viewed, because I would look forward to the weekends. And not because I got the weekend off like most workers, because I got to do the job that I started to love. And I remember one of the bank managers actually came to me and she said, "Kurt, is this your main job, or is security your main job? Because you're here 5 days a week and you do 10 hours on the weekends." And I was like, "I got to be square with you. That's my favorite job. That's my main gig. And if I could make a career out of it," this is when I was 22 or 23. I said, if I could make a career out of it, I would make a career out of it. But there wasn't the opportunity at the time.
Yeah.
But it certainly was something.
Interesting.
And it was funny that it was viewed like that, because I talked about it a lot, and I think that there may be a certain amount of envy, when you really buy into the world of crowd control and the camaraderie and the brotherhood and the excitement of the work,
absolutely,
and socializing.
Absolutely.
It's intoxicating for a man in their young 20s.
It is, mate. Can I tell you actually what you said there? What you said there about the bank workers being sort of infatuated with the stories and the excitement. That's actually kind of mirrors. I wrote a book called Bouncer Stories. So one second, let me do a quick plug. Bouncer Stories, One Man's Life Behind the Velvet Rope, available on Amazon or on my website, joesaunders.com.au. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. But I actually wrote that many years removed from working the doors. And the reason I wrote it was, like, I had all these stories that I'd been delivering for years as a security trainer. Like, I'd been sort of verbally telling these stories over and over. And I was very fortunate to have some mentors early on that, especially after my first trip to court, when I realized that I was being asked to recall an incident that happened 7 months prior, that perhaps taking detailed notes was important. So I'm really fortunate to have shoeboxes full of notepads that had very intricate dialogue and descriptions and so on. So anyway, I've been telling these stories for years to other security guards, and I just kind of assumed that these stories weren't that fantastic, because when you're talking to other people that live that life, and most of my friends were cops or soldiers or security, or like someone dealing like with nurses or doctors or people that are around the sewers, so shall we say. Kind of assumed that the stories weren't that special, and it wasn't until I was removed from it, and I was actually I just randomly came across a Facebook memory or a photo of me with a big bite mark taken out of my side from a guy who got angry because I told him he couldn't stay in the pub in shorts, and it ended up escalating, brawling under a table and him biting a chunk out, because that's a fairly logical chain of events. I posted it up, and all of a sudden, all the people from my church who have never known me as being someone who's engaged in violence.
Yeah.
Well, oh my God, that's an amazing story. Have you got any more? And I was
Yeah.
like, well, yeah, I do. And I started writing these
Yeah.
stories. And you need to write a book. And I thought, oh, apparently for regular people, this stuff is exciting. Okay.
It is.
So
Yeah, that's right.
that's actually what led to the book, was just my normal friends who I didn't really have many years. My normal friends were saying, this stuff's, this is wild.
We want to know more. We want to know more.
I've never killed anyone. This isn't wild. Like, to me, the wild stories are the ones with like there's multiple homicides. Whereas, like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah. To us, it becomes routine. But I suppose when they see us, in our day-to-day life, and at that time, I'd have, Esme Smith walk up and I'd be like, oh, how can I help you today? 70-year-old Esme, would you like insurance with this transaction? Finding out that, on the weekends I deal with highly intoxicated, very aggressive people routinely was a little bit of a shock to them.
Yeah. No, it's good times, mate. Yeah. So sorry, back to your story. You've been employed in-house.
That's right. So I was employed in-house as a head of security. I got to this point where I was able to sort of start, forming a security team with a couple of the other guys that were already really good in-house security guards. They paid us really well, which is an absolutely critical part of forming a good security outfit, and something that is chronic in our industry. Is underpayment of guards, in my opinion, anyhow. And so we were all working in-house, and I did that for around 3.5 years, and we ended up winning a Safer Venue Award, a gold standard in the city, because we were the late night venue. We're open till 5 a.m. Dealing with a high level of intoxicated people at the door and sorting them out, managing incidents, dealing with the police, and that was kind of without any research knowledge that I have previously, without any government policy knowledge. But I certainly wanted to find out more. And again, all through this time, I'm still working at the bank. And so at that point, I got to work with another guy who's now my business partner and has been for the last 7 years, named Jamie Law. And we identified a gap in the market for the kind of crowd control that we were doing. And that was that we were both high-level communicators, focused on de-escalation. Neither of us were martial artists, which I think in this regard actually assisted us. Now, that's not to say that we were totally unversed in physical combat or hand-to-hand stuff. I'd done certainly bits and pieces of it throughout my life, and Jamie was quite a high-level judo practitioner. And a number of the guys that worked on the team were also in that world. We had a number of mixed martial artists because, as we know, they're drawn to that kind of industry. But we identified a gap in the market that said to us, although a lot of people discussed it and claimed that they had this kind of approach, we actually saw that there was a need for a more friendly, concierge-based security officer within licensed venues. And we saw that the legislation was moving away from that. The punitive measures that those policymakers were bringing in certainly were reducing the amount of violence that we were seeing, and we needed to move in line with that as crowd controllers. We needed to be at the forefront of our industry if we wanted to continue providing the best service possible, because we believed in safer communities and safer venues. So we started our security company in September 2012 as a business, and we got our license in November of that year. And September of 2012 was quite a big year for me personally, because at the time I'd finished at the bank a few months earlier, and I'd sold cars for a little while during the week. I drove trucks during the week, still all the while doing security on the weekends. Saw this opening in the market, and I'm like, this is the time. This is when, this is where I need to move into crowd control and security as a long-term career option, because I believe that I can make a change to the industry and a change to people's lives that's positive. And so in September 2012, we started the company, and I enrolled in uni. Now, initially I was doing a psychology degree. I did that for 6 months. I realized that it wasn't for me. And I actually enrolled through Open Universities in Murdoch. I started studying a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in security, terrorism and counterterrorism because it was the highest level security degree available at the time. And on a side note, it was a bit of I suppose, a quarter life crisis because I parted ways with a girlfriend at the time, my first love, and found a new one as well. So it was a big month in my life, but it took me on a path that I have absolutely no regrets over. So September 2012 was the formation of our company, Big Dog Security, and that's essentially, I suppose, truly where the story begins. My company, the academic approach that I decide to take now to resolving alcohol-fueled violence, not just in licensed venues now, but it's kind of, my knowledge has expanded to communities as well. I was the security manager at Voyager's Ayers Rock Resort from September 2017 until February this year, and I'm now their security consultant and security recruiter as well. So that was a little bit of a, moving into a different, moving away from licensed venues, although they were still there, and moving to community safety overall. So that's how the story
really
began.
Fascinating. It's a really fascinating topic, and that's the main reason I wanted to have you on, because we talk a lot about one-to-one violence, dealing with it yourself, but there's a much bigger discussion to be had about how you protect communities from violence, and how you limit violence, how you manage violence, how you prevent violence at a community level, at a societal level. And I think there's the principles that you apply in making a venue safer can certainly be extrapolated to a community and to industry. So I'd really love to unpack that, but let's just talk about your studies and where that took you, and then we'll dive into some myth busting, because I know you're itching to do that.
Absolutely. So I studied part-time, obviously, as the business was expanded. We started with one guard and one venue, and now in Queensland, and now we have around 150 plus guys working in 3 states, and obviously we do the security consultancy in the Northern Territory. So the study that I did, basically, I would say it kind of gave me a little bit of a framework initially in relation to a more academic approach to security. It certainly taught me how to research, because that's something that many people don't actually know is a learned skill, is how to research. And it's something that, again, that I'm very passionate about, is like, if you're going to be an expert on a subject, you should learn how to research that particular subject. So as my degree moved along, and there are a lot of counterterrorism units, there's a lot of geopolitical stuff, international relations stuff in it as well. And whilst that stuff is certainly fascinating, to be honest, I kind of wanted to wind it back a little bit, because community safety and being someone who works on the ground still was where my passion truly, was truly lying. So towards the end of my degree, you finally get to the point where you're allowed to choose your own topics and start to do a little bit of research. And naturally, the second that I was able to do my own research, I turned to alcohol-fueled violence. So I've done a couple of projects, some significant literature reviews around policy in Australia over the last 10 to 15 years, and then utilising that sort of created a project that I'd love to implement at some stage, or a research project that I'd love to, that's kind of in its infancy at the moment, but something that I'd love to do in the long term. Now, earlier this year, I also did a diploma of security and risk management, which is kind of, as you would know, the base level for management and security in this country. And I'm currently studying a Masters of Security and Strategic Studies now, basically to further. It's a research masters, not a coursework masters. And I'm hoping, again, that I can learn more about the ins and outs of how to conduct a really thorough research assignment. Some of the people that I really look up to, as my career has progressed, like Dr. Tony Zalewski and Dr. Anne Fox. She's an anthropologist that has dealt with drinking culture in Australia and New Zealand for a long time. Dr. Zalewski did a study in Chapel Street, I'm not sure if you're aware of that one, but there's some of the most intricate studies in relation to alcohol-fueled violence. And look, I kind of think that there are some gaps in the field that really need to be looked into. That perhaps towards the end of the masters I can start, and then if I can get a sponsor, perhaps move into a doctorate towards the end of it, because it is something that I really want to make a lifetime of work out of.
That's awesome, man. To have such a clear passion for something that, so many, like probably 99.997% of people that end up working as a nightclub bouncer don't last more than 5 years. To let alone
they don't
try and make it a deliberate to deliberately make it your life's work, rather than just being stuck there for 20 years wondering what the hell happened to your life. That's really unique. And to become a doctorate, to sort of achieve a doctorate in essentially crowd control, which is it's such a unique proposition.
Isn't it? It sounds strange when you say it. It like that. It really does. But essentially, that's what I would like to do. I guess because it is so unique, and there is a gap there. As you alluded to, most guys don't stay in the industry longer than 5 years. Now, for working for me and that 150 guys, I've got tradies, I've got students, I've got people that work full time, doing some other security jobs, that might just be mall cops or static work as well. And many of them, it is a thoroughfare. It's a way to make some money on the weekends, perhaps before they have a family and start a life, or while they're studying. It's just a way to supplement some income until they finish their degree. And look, that's totally fine. I fully understand that that's how our industry works, but I think it is important that some people specialize in it and take a keen interest in the field, because it definitely generates safe communities.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. All right, so that's a really good introduction as to who you are and what you're passionate about. So let's dive into that topic, especially look, alcohol-fueled violence as a whole. My first sort of interaction with myth busting in that field, it came actually after I got out of full-time bouncing. So without going into my whole story, I think I did that in one of the early episodes, but so I worked full-time in nightclubs for about 5 years. And my first step out of that, I did sort of a short stint as an area manager for a corporate security company, and then my first real step out of that was moving into hospital security. And I remember once, obviously hospital security, you're still dealing with the people that got locked up in the nightclubs. They're just now in hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my business. The funny thing is that my business.
You just get the really bad ones.
That's where he came from. He came from hospital security when we started the company. So we have background as well.
I remember very distinctly. I was sitting in a tea room at a hospital on a morning shift, and my mum sending me these text messages frantically about how she's so glad that I'm out of bouncing now because the news was showing how bad the violence was in Brisbane and how bad the nightclub, because there was all this these brawls happening on the streets. Someone, this is probably 2009-ish. So we're now starting to get widespread cell phone video cameras, right? So all of a sudden there's all this documentation of the fights. And people are able to upload it quickly, and it actually became a teaching point for me when I was teaching security guards. I said, don't do anything dumb, because if you do, it's going to be on YouTube before you're home from your shift.
Always.
Right? You don't have to worry about Channel 7 arriving. Like you're going to be recorded and it's going to be uploaded instantly.
That's right.
But I remember getting these texts from my mum saying, "Oh, look how bad things have gotten. I'm so glad you're out of that industry." And I said, that just looks like a normal Thursday night. Like, it doesn't look. There's nothing new about it. It's just someone's recorded it. So something we talked about offline was just this perception that alcohol-fueled violence is getting worse, and you've actually got a counterpoint to that. So I'll let you explore that a little bit.
Yeah, look, and again, I suppose the interesting thing is when someone is hurt or killed related to alcohol-fueled violence, it gets enormous media coverage, and we're all subject to the availability heuristic, where something is overcovered, and people believe that it's happening far more often than it is. Look, and it's interesting that you mentioned 2009 because that is, around about the starting point for some of the best reductions that we've seen in alcohol-fueled violence over the last decade. And the trend line since 2009, as a matter of fact, has been a consistent downward trend in that time. And look, I think it's important to point out that when I say that things are much better than they used to be, and they certainly are, alcohol consumption is still a strong risk factor for violent offending and victimization. But, we definitely need to be very nuanced in the way that we talk about the problem and the way that we solve the problem, because it's far more complicated than, perhaps just a guy got drunk and punched someone, so we stop them from going out at 3 a.m., which is typically, the binary kind of arguments that are made around it. I think, there are a couple of statistics that I like to point to, that really highlight, really highlight the fact that things are getting better. And this is still, these statistics, these ones are several years old, and it's gotten better since then. That I remember the city of Sydney, before their council, before the lockout laws were introduced in New South Wales, they still recorded data, and data tells us the story. And serious assaults and incidents in 2010 for Sydney were 3,650. So 2 years later, they recorded that they did the same study, recorded the serious assaults and incidents in the same areas, and it was down to 1,327. So we had a 64% reduction in 2 years with no lockouts. And we definitely fall victim to, or I say fall victim to, but really we understand that politicians like to make claims that their policies are working, and so we fall victim to it in that regard. But it's definitely a post hoc ergo propter hoc, like a this therefore that. It's a vacuous truth. For decades, violence in cities has been going out. It's the same thing happened with in New York, which is one of the most famous cases. Is that Rudy Giuliani and Mike Bloomberg both claimed massive reductions in crime, but in fact they were on trend. And I think that it's important that we note that the studies that have been done, a lot of people have put a lot of time into working out what the true risk factors are when it comes to alcohol-fueled violence. It's so varied. I mean, there are things that we worked out, like overcrowded venues, sexual competition, higher temperatures, like if it's hot inside the venue, if there's an inaccessible bar or toilets, high noise levels. Men particularly are prone to competitive games. I'm sure, mate, you've got the story yourself where you see a couple of mates play fighting, and it escalates very, very quickly from friendly.
Yeah, especially when they bump someone who wasn't involved. Yeah,
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And all of these,
or the overzealous crowd controller comes in to break up the fight that isn't actually a fight, then both guys end up fighting him instead.
Yep, that's exactly right. And I think that the important thing here is when we say, in terms of our understanding of violence is fueled by alcohol, it ignores the complexity, of the assemblages of violence out there, and kind of precludes all of these other factors and constituting forces that make up what is alcohol-fueled violence. Kind of the point where I don't even like the term alcohol-fueled, because there are a number of conflicting studies out there and a lot of research that will point to other things like masculinities, for example. And this is one of the things that I tried to understand, is that definitely when I refer to masculinities, I'm talking about the nature and the nurture. So, there are certain ways that men can be brought up, and it varies from culture to culture. As we know, alcohol-fueled violence in a place like Japan or Spain is much lower than in a place like Australia, and that comes down to cultural masculinities. But the fact of the matter is that there is a universal to human behaviour, and that is that men are more prone to violence across the board, and that's not a nurture thing. And we need to understand the nuance in both of these kinds of facets. If that's an all right start, mate.
Yeah. There's a really interesting really interesting piece there about some of the things you mentioned that might help reduce violence actually also
Mm,
reduce the income over the bar. So, for
yeah.
example, I
Mm,
mean, I know it was common practice for the venue to be warm because
hmm
one, it brings people in off the street, especially during winter.
mm,
People are more
yeah.
likely to stay in and not go out.
Yeah.
And we know that
Mm,
when people leave the venue, they're more likely to reconsider their options about whether they're going to go home,
mm,
whether they're going to go to a different
hmm
venue, because they're already outside.
mm.
Even if they're going out for a
That's
smoke
right.
break, there's still
Yep.
a
They're
chance that they're
already
just
outside.
not going to go back in.
Yep.
So it's in the venue's best interest to keep them
Mm,
inside and keep them comfortable.
yeah. That's right.
Also, even in summer, if the venue's hot, people will drink
Mm,
more because they're
yeah.
yeah
Yeah.
foolishly trying to hydrate on alcohol. But I mean, it's natural human
Yeah.
instinct when you're hot
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
drink and
Absolutely. It
to get
feels. Yeah.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah. It
So
goes down the throat,
yeah,
and
so that's
they feel that they're getting hydrated, but then absolutely
yeah,
not.
and I remember working in clubs in Fortitude Valley,
Mm,
and this I'm pretty sure is highly illegal still, but
mm,
even at the time, I'm pretty sure it was illegal. But they'd switch off the water in the taps in the bathroom because they didn't want people
mm.
to be able to get free water. Because
Oh, that's insanity.
yeah,
Mm,
but
mm,
that was right around the time when venues were really struggling financially because
sure.
their patrons were just spending $30 on a pill,
Yep.
um, and rather than spending $200 on beer.
Mm,
And all of a sudden, the venues weren't making any money, and the only way they could make money
yep.
was selling bottled water. So
Mm.
because when someone's on pills, they're not going to go drink beer as well
Yeah,
necessarily,
that's right.
but they're always going to go
Yep.
get water.
Mm,
So they were selling their branded water at $8 a bottle over
yeah.
the bar, and turning off the water in the bathrooms.
Yeah.
So you
Yep.
want to talk about a risk factor for increasing overdose, as well
Oh,
as as well
that's
as
right.
erratic behaviour, make someone dehydrated and pilled up at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because some of these risk factors
Mm-hmm.
are manufactured to increase profits.
Mm,
Because the more someone spends on alcohol, then the better it is for the venue, and so
mm.
there's actually conflicting priorities there for the
Which is
venue.
interesting. On that point, like I firmly believe that best practice security relates to the profitability of a venue. Because as we talked about, if you get those people, they're dehydrated, they've had alcohol, they've had drugs, they become violent, or they don't even have to become violent necessarily. They just have to be unaware of the amenities surrounding them, bumping into people, making other people uncomfortable through their behaviour, and those people are going to leave the venue. So ultimately, it's very counterproductive, and I can understand. Back then when things were a little bit rogue, and part of the reason we've had such a great reduction, in alcohol-fueled violence incidents and liquor-related incidents in general, is because governing bodies are watching, RSA, bad practice far more, and they're taking action against rogue operators, which is a very, very positive step. Because I truly believe that the best practice liquor operation leads to profitability and safety.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also, like, if you look at the hospitality industry as a whole, and we will get into
Mm,
communities shortly, but the
yeah,
hospitality
sure.
industry as a whole, I mean, most venues that I worked at, and the ones
Mm,
that I'm aware of now still,
yeah.
they're typically the day-to-day operations are run by people that are in their 20s or early 30s who are just trying to get a
Mm,
start in a management
mm,
role, who
yeah.
they're being judged on what the bottom line says, and
Mm,
they're looking at how big was Saturday compared to last Saturday compared to the Saturday
mm,
last year, and
mm,
that's really what they're looking at. They're not looking at
mm,
what's the venue and the reputational damage of having
mm-hmm.
police attend, or how many people
Yeah,
didn't show up because of someone being restrained on the footpath, or how much
mm,
damage was done by having an overdose outside
mm-hmm.
the nightclub 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
ago. And
Mm-hmm.
when that business downturn occurs, you can't just patch it back and say, well, that was definitely because we had 6 drunk people inside 2 weeks ago.
Mm, that's right.
But what they can do then is they can say, well, business is down this month. Oh, it's because of the weather, or it's because this place opened up, or it's because there's I've heard everything from, oh, there's a
Yeah.
new batch there's a new batch of Eckies on the market. No one's
Yeah.
drinking at the
Yeah. I've
moment
heard
because
that one.
everyone's trying the new
Yep.
pills. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's it's like the old cliche that, oh, there's a new gas station that opened up down the corner, therefore business is
Mm,
down. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, but people can
no.
blame anything, and
Yeah.
it's really easy to
Absolutely.
not blame the culture and the atmosphere of your
Mm,
venue,
mm.
because it's not reflected in direct numbers. It takes time to filter through.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It does take time, and I think that people don't understand that the not like long-term consequences, but first, second, and third order consequences that come from these actions. And people are far more, they don't necessarily talk about their negative experiences, but they will vote with their feet. In fact, just this weekend gone on the Friday night, I was working at one of our venues because I still like to work on the ground. I think it's really important that we're seen as leaders, and this is part of my approach, that we're working in venues doing shifts still. And the fact is that, again, and this comes back to something that you would be well and truly aware of, the environment inside a venue. There was a ratio of 2 women to every guy. Now, when we started doing security there 4 years ago, it certainly wasn't the case, and we had a far higher number of incidents. Now, women will go to a venue that they feel safe in, they don't feel threatened in. Again, it's not even about the amount of incidents that it has, but the environment that they've created. And now they've got to a point where, after several years, they understand that they have consistent business every weekend because they've applied a best practice approach. They've hired, give myself a plug, but they've hired a high quality security company who look after their patrons and ensure that we are providing an environment that is unthreatening the very large majority of the time. And now, it's not like it used to be where they were like, oh, is it going to be a bad weekend? Are OLGR going to come in, or the relevant, licensing body from state to state will come in and give them a fine because they've got too many intoxicated people in the venue. Like that doesn't occur anymore. Because they've knuckled down and understood the long-term consequences of their actions.
Yeah. So about the gender ratios, it's a really interesting point. Something that I wasn't. Yeah, obviously, I got started in the industry when I was 19. I'd barely even been in a nightclub before I started working in them. I was 18, sorry. So I mean, I literally had been to a pub like 3 times before I started working in one. Realizing that having a higher proportion of women makes for a much safer and more enjoyable night. Even though it's interesting to see what the spend over the bar actually is. But I wanted to mention on that, we talked about how sometimes it's a slower sort of spillover if the venue doesn't feel safe. How do you the growth of social media and the ability to give an immediate review or immediate negative feedback, because it is typically a negative if it's immediate feedback, has changed the way you do business? Because now you can see venues getting blasted the same night if they have a negative interaction with a security guard or a crowd controller at the front door. So you can have, I got turned away, I'm angry about it, especially if I'm sober enough to still operate a mobile phone. I can jump on and I can blast the venue for it. And sometimes, I mean, look, there are plenty of times where I would have turned away someone who wasn't actually intoxicated because I had a bad read on it, or because I didn't. I had a bad feeling about them, which may or may not have been well founded at all. You tend to trust your instincts when it comes to that sort of stuff. So
it's better to be it's better to err on the side of caution always.
Yeah, well, I always believe it's better to have your fights on the footpath rather than inside the venue. So if someone's going to arc up and start throwing punches, I'd rather it happen outside where the police get them quickly rather than inside where it's going to disturb everybody else. But you also see now with venues that you'll get someone Facebook living a restraint outside the venue. And now you've got immediate media coverage because the news agencies will pick up and pay for that video. You've got a brand that is now damaged because last thing anyone saw about them was their logo in the background with three bouncers standing on someone's head. And the reputational damage is now immediate, which is a change in how it's always been. So do you think that's changed the way venues are now looking at their security and their alcohol control measures?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you brought this up because it is something that I routinely discuss with clients or potential clients and also our staff when we do our fortnightly training sessions, is that in this day and age of instant access to media, and it's not even just the fact that everybody has a camera in their pocket and they can record and edit everything that you do to suit their own narrative, it's that it doesn't even have to be the violent side of things. I'll give you an example, one that happened to myself. So I was working at a relatively high level high-level venue. It's quite a fancy rooftop bar, and I'm wearing what we call our executive uniform. So I wear a full suit on the door of this venue. I was working by myself. It was about 6 or 6:30 in the evening, and a lady came to the door, and she had a backpack on. And I just said to her, look, before you go inside, is it okay if I check your backpack? I just need to make sure there's no alcohol. This is not a BYO establishment. If that's okay, that'd be great. And then you can head on upstairs. And she turned around to me and she said, you know what? I don't think I want to go inside. And she walked off. And I thought, okay, no problem. If you don't want us to check, I could either make the assumption that she did have alcohol, or that perhaps having a security guard there wasn't to her liking in some regard. Which it turns out, I found out that was the second of those options was the true one, because she went on to TripAdvisor. She gave me a 2-star rating, which is a bit of a kick in the guts. I always thought that I was pretty nice. The people were pretty good at the job.
2 stars of promotion for most people.
Yeah. That's right. Well, the fact here's the kicker is that she basically wrote a review that said breakfast omelette was good, but I came through at night and the security was overbearing. And I'm like, well, I dragged the mark down, but at least they make good omelettes. So, that's. But in all honesty, that's how simple it is to tarnish a reputation. And I always use those kind of experiences when I'm training my staff. I always refer to myself. We have a fortnightly training program, and we say that your reputation is directly tied to the venues and every other security guard that works for Big Dog Security. Now, on the venues, we just have a logo that says BD Security, so most of the people don't even know our name, and they believe that we work for the venue, and our reputation directly reflects the venue. And that's part of our success over the last 7 years, is that people understand that our approach in terms of being a concierge, de-escalation, consistent communication, ensuring that we are, that we're doing the right things and taking the right steps, it's the number one request from clients. The first thing they said, so they go, how would you handle this situation? I go, well, I'm going to use passive verbal communication, and unless you absolutely have to, as we know, then you use proportionate force. But again, verbal is something that the term I've learned off you, mate, is communication as a martial art.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important.
That's exactly right. And for venues, it's the number one requested thing. Whereas previously, in many years ago, you'd want a guy that look like us on the door, big guys, that can handle themselves. Now, your security's far more of an effective mechanism with people who are high-level communicators. And, a lot of the studies point to that. The one on Chapel Street with Dr. Tony Zalewski pointed to the fact that your ratio of crowd controllers that you have, should have a substantial amount of more women. And I would encourage, to listeners, if you're a woman who listens to this, or if you're someone who knows a woman, who's a great communicator, to enter the industry, because there aren't enough of them in the industry at the moment, and it definitely assists enormously in de-escalation of incidents, and it is one of the things that's routinely requested by our clients, and it's actually difficult to find.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Actually, one thing you said there, just regarding being filmed, it's amazing how that has become such a cultural norm. I remember, look, I started the industry in 2004, so 2004, it feels like it may as well be in the Stone Age, right? 2004, there was no Facebook. I don't even know if there was MySpace. I don't know if MySpace was a thing there or not. There was no YouTube. There was no one. I think maybe some phones had cameras, but they were really poor resolution, especially at nighttime. Like you weren't going to see shit at nighttime. So it wasn't normal to be photographed. And I remember the first couple of times that I started seeing people taking photos of us while we're trying to do restraints, or we're trying to evict somebody, and they're trying to get close-ups of your crowd control number or of your face or whatever. And we were operating on this assumption that you're not allowed to take photos of me without my permission, which is completely false.
Completely false.
So we're operating on this assumption, like this is a little bit of bro science law, that we're allowed to smash your phone.
Yes.
That was the normal practice. Was you slap the phone out of their hand, and
Yeah.
that's the price they pay for taking your photo, which highly illegal. Hopefully,
Yeah, that's
statute of
right.
limitations
I
will
actually,
passed on.
I actually know. Yeah, I know I know security guards that have been fined. And had to go to court for taking that exact action. Yeah, exactly.
It's the
Yeah.
exact same thing.
Mm.
But I mean, that was our normal thing, right? Is that for a while until I started questioning, and I was like, I actually don't know we're allowed to destroy property because we're getting a photo taken. But moving on from that, I mean, then it became sort of very normal to be filmed and to, especially because people, and the thing is, people don't start filming before the incident happens. They've got no reason to be filming you beforehand. So they won't see what started the incident. They'll see once they turn around and they realize something's happening, and then they'll get the cameras out. So if you've actually handled the incident well, I mean, if you've handled the incident well, they won't see the other person doing anything. They'll just see the result.
That's right.
The best case I've got of that, I think it's actually in the book, but I had an incident at the Exchange Hotel in Brisbane CBD. I don't know if the Exchange is still. I hope it is. I really enjoyed it at the time. Very, very busy nightclub at the time. It was sort of the place to be in the CBD, and I'll cut the story short just to illustrate the point. I saw a couple arguing on the dance floor. You could tell by the body language that they're having a bit of a domestic. It seemed to me that the girl wanted to go, the guy wanted to stay. She sort of stormed off, and there was like a little edge of the dance floor, a couple of steps going down to a bar area, and she was sitting on the steps, texting her friends. Probably the body language suggested she was texting her friends saying, "I can't leave. He's being a bit of a dick." Right? That's how I sort of interpreted the situation.
Yeah.
So I can still distinctly picture her. She's this like 5'2" petite blonde with a white halter neck dress on. I can still picture her exactly. And the boyfriend's a average size guy, and he's walked down. I've seen him walk towards her, and I didn't think too much of it. It looked like he was coming over to apologize, maybe, or to realize he's in the doghouse. And then she's still got her head down on her phone, and he stood in front of her and just punted her in the face. Like just kicked her square in the face and shattered her nose, rocked her head back. She's fallen backwards on the step. I don't know if she was unconscious or just disorientated, but I was standing about 2 meters away from him. So I've jumped on the guy and locked him up very securely. I'll say it was quite snug. It's one of those things that sort of is an immediate, there's no excuse type of arrangement. But anyway, I've locked him up. Very, very, makes sense. I want to make sure that he was well aware that his escapade was over.
Restrained.
Like there's no cheap shots, but he was certainly well aware that he was no longer in control of the situation. Anyway, so I've got him locked up. Another one of the guys has seen me move in. He's grabbed the other arm. We're taking him out the door. So we've got him outside. Got him out the front. Put him down on the footpath. And I've said, no, we're holding him here. The police are getting called. He's being arrested. Obviously, the other guys have not seen what's happened. They're just going on with what I say, which is good practice. We had a pretty good team that trusted my word. He needed to be held. Anyway, we've got him restrained on the footpath. Typical sort of arrangement, which is not good restraint practice. But we had two hammerlocks and a guy holding his legs, which was standard at the time. Don't do that if you're listening. That's not a good one for restraint practice. But that's
please don't. Please.
No, hog tie position. But at the time we didn't know any better. But anyway, the guy is screaming for his life that we are breaking his arms, and I'm looking at it going, I mean, it's fairly uncomfortable, but I can tell that you're not in danger, right? He's just making a song and dance. I've looked up, and I've seen 4 cameras on me, four videos shot, and of course the social media commentator is already running his mouth about, oh, look at you bullies, you thugs, you didn't even do anything. Why are you on him? And that, I've sort of pulled myself out of the restraint, put someone else involved, because I always believe if you're emotionally involved, you shouldn't be hands-on. So if you're emotionally involved, if you're ever angry at someone, you shouldn't be the one putting your hands on them, because you're not going to.
It's the tag out.
Exactly. Yeah, your judgment is impaired whether you like it or not. So
that's exactly right. Well, on that note, I just sorry to interrupt you, mate. But it is what you just said then is actually a big part of what we teach. And again, going back to something we talked about off air, you said that, not a lot of security providers do ongoing training, and we do ongoing training on a fortnightly basis. And something that I really like to point to in relation to that is, when you become emotionally involved, and we're all guilty of it from time to time, you're not operating with your best faculties, is that being tagged out is the very best option. So that someone else comes in. So first and foremost, you're not emotionally involved. Secondly, the person that you're dealing with who was angry at you now has someone else in front of them. And you're unlikely to do the wrong thing because you're not in the situation anymore. And one of the big things that we teach our guys is that when someone comes to tag you out, it's not because they think you're a pussy, and it's definitely not you're any of a less of a man for backing out. That's your comrade. Your guy that you're working with is actually coming over to protect you.
Exactly.
And so they're not emotionally involved in the situation.
You're half a second away from a dumb decision.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just the conclusion of that story was I then started trying to do sort of crowd management to try and get people away, just as I would have it, one of our bar girls was bringing out victim, the girl who had been kicked to the face, and she could not have been a more dramatic image if you tried. Like, she was a pretty girl whose nose was flat halfway across her face. She's wearing blood streaking through her blonde hair. She's got she looks like someone's poured a bottle of red wine down her dress. She's an absolute mess. And I said, if you want to see why he's down there, turn around and put your camera on her, because that's the reason that we grabbed him.
That's what
he
did.
He turned around, and all of a sudden he's seen the victim, and the whole mentality went from calling us bullies and thugs to wanting to maim him. Like, piece of shit, and it went on and on. And then we had to actually protect the guy that we were restraining from the crowd who wanted to be. But it's amazing how that context works.
That's
because
right.
people don't start filming before the incident happens, they film the aftermath. And one thing that I started teaching my students was, if you're being filmed, one, you can't emotionally react to the filming because it makes you look guilty. And I wish the police were better at this, because I see well-intentioned police that respond really poorly to being filmed, and it makes them look like they're trying to silence. It does. They're trying to hide something. So I always say, if you're being filmed, make it an advertisement for your training and an advertisement for your company. Make it so goddamn boring, no one's ever going to upload it. Because I made it a point, like in my later years in the industry, where I was sort of just making cameos here and there. Whenever I was actually doing a restraint and someone was filming me, I would make it like a how-to video. Like, that's okay, sir. I hope you're comfortable down here. I'm trying not to cause you any undue pain. I just need you to stop struggling a little bit so I can release the pressure, because I really don't want you to be uncomfortable. I really just want you to stay here and relax until the police arrive, and I'll be happy to hand you over. And if you need any medical attention, we can arrange that for you. No problems whatsoever. Because I want to make sure that video is so goddamn boring they never do anything with it.
It's never. That's right. It's not going anywhere.
Exactly. And I'm more than happy to. I've even handed someone a business card while they're filming me and said, here, if you're interested in security training, you can reach me here. I'm more than happy to discuss the ins and outs of everything we're doing here tonight. And then it's so unsensational, it becomes a bloody ad. I taught the guys, have some fun with it. Yeah, don't. If you look like
it's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because even like prior to say the physical side of an incident, some of us, we compete against each other when we're working together, and it's interesting. Like, but you talked about competitive behaviour. It was a negative thing before, and I'm like, well, actually, as crowd controllers, the guys that have been doing it for some time, and guys that, our mutual friend Rob Giuffrida is one of them. If we're discussing something with someone, we have a competition of who can seem calmer, and not remain calmer, but I mean seem calmer. So it's a constant competition of de-escalation between the both of us, to the point that anyone that's talking to us looks like, even if they're semi-reasonable, they look aggressive, because we are competing against each other to be the calmest person in the situation. And it's those sort of little things that make the job interesting. They make it fun. A little bit of competition is a good thing, especially when it's done right. It becomes an advertisement. And particularly, I mean, I'm working for my own company, so I try to do that all the time, but it definitely becomes an advertisement for your company and the whole industry, because referring to people getting their cameras out and, your thugs, your bullies, and that's just the assumption that they're going to make all the time. And one of the things that we're trying to do as the company gets older and as I move forward in my career is to change that image. And certainly, you would have worked with them in the past yourself. We understand that there are crowd controllers out there who perhaps shouldn't be in the industry for that reason, because they are power trippers or thugs, but they're absolutely they're a small minority. The vast majority are great security officers. They're high-level communicators, and they want the best outcomes for people. But as with anything, it is the 1% that ruin it for everybody. But if I can reduce that 1%, which is always my goal through my training and best practice security, which we'll get into in a little bit relating to communities, we can reduce that further.
Absolutely. One last story, just because it's entertaining before we move on to the community.
Yeah, it's great.
You just jogged my memory of.
Yeah.
Oh mate, yeah. You said something before about the camaraderie and the bonds you form on the door. There's one particular story that still cracks me up every now and then. You mentioned having a competition to see who can be the calmest. Well,
yeah.
There's a guy I worked with, Andrew Ryan. If you happen to be listening, hit me up on Facebook. I've got no idea what you're doing with your life these days, but if you're out there and you're listening, hit me up because I'd love to talk to you. I worked with this guy, Andrew, and he was the most untypical bouncer. Like he'd been in the industry forever. A number of years, which is basically forever. And was a really nice guy and really well spoken, and could have been I don't know, he could have been just about anything. Could have been working at a bank with you, but he had a really good sense of humor, and I really enjoyed being on a roaming team with him because we just banter the whole time. And there's boring nights where your conversation just sort of leads into the most random crap that you've ever there's no way you could have ever expected it to be talking about it. We ended up talking about Sesame Street, which is even more bizarre because neither of us had children. And we're talking about the Count from Sesame Street, the Count character. Right? And it became this thing where we were like quoting the Count. And then while we're doing an eviction, I thought, I'm going to see if I can crack him up. So we're doing the typical, mate, you're going to have to leave. We're trying everything. He's giving us the stone face. And the way that typically plays out, for those of you that haven't been in the industry, if you don't respond and you just ignore the existence of the fact that someone's asking you to leave, is that eventually someone's going to grab you and they're going to walk you out the door. So normally we go into, do you understand I've asked you to leave a licensed premises? Do you understand I can use reasonable proportionate force, not occasioning grievous bodily harm to make you leave the premises? I'm giving you one last chance to leave the premises under your own power. That's the normal spiel, right? So what I did is I said, look, mate, I know you can hear me and I know you're ignoring me. I'm going to give you to the count of 3 to make a decision. And then with a completely straight face, I said, okay, are you ready? I'm going to start counting. 1, 2, 3. And the guy just looked at me like I was insane. Yeah. And I realized I'd actually used in de-escalation, it's something I call a pattern interruption, where you do something that's so out of whack with what they expect. It doesn't fit the pattern of behaviors they expect. That he just sort of looked at me like I was insane. Then he started to he goes, "Are you all right?" I said, "I'm fine. What's wrong with you?" And he's like, all right, mate, I'll just go. That's fine. And meanwhile, I'm looking at Andrew, and he's doubled over, pissing his pants because I used the count. And then it became a thing to see which one of us could crack up the other, and it became like a normal face battle to see who could last the longest. Almost like that. I don't know if you've seen that Ryan Reynolds dad joke video where he's trying to crack up his counterpart. But you have some fun with it. And I think sometimes having fun de-escalate situations, because if you can tell people are having fun, it's very hard to punch them. So
that's exactly right. And look, it's absolutely the best way to approach it. It's one of the things that we teach our guys is that it's very simple, because we get an hour a fortnight with the guys, and we can't overload them with information. You don't want infoxication to occur, so we try and make things as basic as possible. But if I say to one of my new guys, I'm like, if you're going to do a removal, go, I'm going to make friends with this person. And humor is a great icebreaker. And if you've got someone that you can make a joke with, or at least attempt to make a joke with, it goes a long way to de-escalating the situation, or that person's not going to see you as a threat anymore. And I think that again, it comes down to that humanization, that they realize you are a person that's just doing a job. And if you see two security guards having fun, if they're aware of that guy probably wasn't aware of it in your story, but that you were attempting to make each other laugh. But if a couple of security guards are having fun with each other, it definitely, attitude is a mirror, and it definitely becomes very difficult to become aggressive and still look like you're in the right, because most people, they want to save face, they want to win, and you can't win that kind of confrontation if you end up looking like the dickhead because everyone around you is smiling and laughing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this we've been rabbiting on for a bit, and we could tell more stories. I really want to give you a chance to talk about community safety initiatives. So I'm just going to open the door. Tell me what you're doing on a community safety level, at a community level to make people safer and try to fix or address alcohol fueled violence.
All right, so man, like one of the big things, and we talked about it a little bit off air, and I think. Perhaps it's easy to get carried away with the other causal factors, particularly when it comes to alcohol fueled violence, and there's a number of independent variables there. And what we tend not to focus on is the people that are dealing with it, on a day-to-day basis. And I mean that in a holistic kind of way, is that, a big thing for us is that we aim to be, and this is in our company vision, the best company that our staff have ever worked for. And it's really important to us that security guards feel like they have a place that they belong, not just within our company, but within our community, because security guards often feel isolated within their communities. So it's important to engage with those communities. So we do this through a number of ways. Primarily, we get involved in a lot of, community engagement charity activities. So we'll do like Salvation Army toy drive, for example, at our Christmas parties. There's a local initiative here around Christmas time called Loads of Love, where they give, people donate lots and lots of food for people that perhaps can't afford it around a Christmas period. Last year, we donated to a drought relief fund. And we get our staff involved with that, and we also, as you've alluded to, we do put this on our Facebook page because we not only want our staff to engage with our community, but we want our community to see that our staff, by and large, are engaging with and care about the community that they're involved in. So that when you do have those situations that arise when someone thinks about getting their phone out, particularly if you become a recognizable brand within a particular region, people get their phone out, and most people in the community have already made up their mind about Big Dog Security. They're like, well, those guys, they assist their community, they want to be part of their community, and they generally give a shit about their community. They want it to be a safer place. Now. That's a really integral and critical part of what we do. The aim is to have a net positive image. Now, we actually have surveyed this stuff. Even within our staff, we regularly survey our staff as to their job satisfaction to ensure that they're feeling engaged with their community, they're feeling engaged with the company. We've ran one only a couple of months ago, which is generally the domain of bigger corporations. And, you find that security companies often, that they're not, it's not to say that they're amateurish, but because a lot of them are crowd controllers first and they move into, running a crowd control company, they're less business oriented and less savvy when it comes to the development and satisfaction, of the staff. Now, the other aim, and look, this occurred significantly to myself when Queensland was thinking about, and they eventually did bring out the lockout laws in Queensland, and it's no secret that I opposed them very heavily. I met with several parliamentarians to discuss best practice security, and I could go into the statistics of it, and I'll just give you a quick rundown. Is that where I'm from in Toowoomba, we managed to get a 90% reduction in arrests and around a 40 to 50% reduction in assaults in the same time frame that the lockout laws in Newcastle got a 40% reduction in assaults. So through best practice, we were able to, achieve similar, if not better results. But a big part of the reason I did that, and I made myself very public when I did it, I spoke to news outlets, I spoke to a number of media people, was because the best thing that you can do is talk to your heaviest detractors. Because again, you need to humanize yourself when it comes to community engagement. If you're an unknown quantity to the people you're dealing with, they're going to make those assumptions about you that they relate to every other security guard that they've ever seen in a licensed venue over the last 20 years. And even though the industry has changed a lot, it takes a lot longer for perceptions to change in that time frame. And we need to take ownership and show leadership in affecting that change ourselves. So that's some of the stuff that we do. I engage heavily with Safe Night Out precincts in Queensland. When I was the security manager at Voyagers Ayers Rock Resort, I founded the Yalara Liquor Action Group, which was basically a collaborative of ourselves, the medical department, police, senior managements at the resort, and anyone who was a leader within the community to come together and discuss issues that were occurring within the community. That's what a Safe Night Out precinct does, and how to best tackle those issues through a collaborative approach. So when the Safe Night Out precincts were brought in Queensland, I put my hand up, became the treasurer of that. And again, I was relatively new to that sort of thing at the time, but I knew that I had I suppose an intuition that engaging with OGR, the Office of Fair Trading, the police, other licensees would result in best practice, because you and I, and even everyone that you've had on your podcast, don't certainly profess to be the font of all knowledge when it comes to managing violence. It takes many people with many different experiences who are willing to have a proper discussion around it to reach best practice. And again, I can go into it in a little bit detail about what we do with our staff. Is obviously encourage them to get involved in this kind of stuff, and then in the background we train them, in all aspects of crowd control.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I just had a thought about something that might be of use to a lot of listeners. Certainly, I mean, look, the listener base to this podcast is fairly unique. I mean, we've got a lot of people that work at the front line of violence, because those are typically people who are interested in learning more about it. But we also have people that manage teams that deal with aggression and violence in different ways, and often the physical response from a workplace point of view is incredibly counterproductive. I mean, you don't want to have if you've got a customer service based team, let's take it out of security for a minute. But if you're a customer service team, you certainly don't want to see like that video of the Hungry Jack's girl, dragging someone across the counter and uppercutting him in the face, even though he desperately deserved it. It was quite fun to watch. That's not necessarily good PR for the restaurant. So if you were, let's say that a company employed you as a consultant to help them establish a good culture, to help their staff deal with antisocial behavior, where maybe they can't control all the risk factors, like they're getting people that are coming in pre-intoxicated. Let's say it's a fast food restaurant, for example, where they're getting people coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning, intoxicated, that are abusive, and so on. What sort of steps would you encourage them to take to help protect their workers and to establish a good culture for dealing with that situation?
Well, first I'd have to gauge the level of staff satisfaction with the work that they're doing, because engagement with your work leads to better outcomes. So I would encourage them to first survey their staff, find out what any and I've done this with my own staff. Find out what they believe the issues are, and see what patterns emerge across all of the staff. And once you've identified the patterns, you can put things in place to address those. Now, the next thing that I would do, and again, we do this with our staff, and I'm always tweaking it, is find out what kind of steps the management are taking, and to reward their staff. So we need to find out how they're engaged, find out what their concerns are, and then find out how they're rewarding their staff to make the staff feel valued. Because to me, the major thing is that your staff are engaged, and this is not rocket science, but how you go about it, is very important. Is basically to find out that make sure they're engaged and make sure that they're being awarded for the work that they're doing. So you have to look at the company culture overall, and so I basically would advise them to basically develop and implement a system of reward that works for their industry. I would also tell them that they need to, as leaders, take responsibility for this stuff. And so sometimes, because as a manager, it can be demoralizing. If you're organizing things, people don't show up, and that's going to happen from time to time. But in a large team, the truth is that it's not always going to be organic from the beginning, and there may be some form of organic relationship there. However, it's integral to understand that this stuff is going to need constant feeding and constant adjusting as you go along, and not to take your foot off the pedal as a leader. Now, for example, public recognition is another a great thing, and that's something that we talked about off air, is that you referred to the fact that we put our employee of the year on our staff page, and not just our employee of the year. We put our employee of the year, we put our runner-up, we put our 4 honourable mentions, the 6 best staff members for Big Dog Security for that year, and we put their name up in lights so that they feel true ownership over the work that they're doing and feel that their work is valued. And so all of this stuff in relation to community engagement and staff engagement, it's a constant feedback loop, and something that does require, a lot of, look, it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of effort, but to get results when it comes to a business, and for us, it is safety, that's what it requires. And once people are dealing with your staff, it's, you kind of referred to it before, but one of the things I'd like to point out is that it is the things that people don't expect that make the difference. And that feeds down from your leadership. And so when someone comes to our company and they expect just to be, another number, they're just there to earn a paycheck, and they don't feel that way, it makes a huge difference to them. And then they'll pass that on to the clients that they're dealing with. And they'll deal with the clients in a manner that shows them it's the things that the clients aren't expecting that make the big difference. And that's, one of the things that we really like to hammer home.
Yeah, that's a really great point. When you're working with staff, or you're employing staff that are dealing with really difficult situations that are emotionally confronting, sometimes we put so much effort on teaching them how to deal with that situation, which is important, without thinking about how satisfied are they with their actual job. Because you can walk through hell every night if you love your job. I mean, we've both done it. That's right. I mean, the things that were normal, the things that were normal back then, I would not do now. But I, similar to what you've created with Big Dog, the company I was working for had a really, really strong culture, to the point where 5 years after the company went bankrupt, that didn't go bankrupt. Sorry, 5 years after the company was merged and acquired by another company, we were still having staff reunions. So
that's incredible.
I've never worked for a company that had reunions after they went out of business. But
that's amazing.
But I mean, you form this bond. But because of that, nothing was too much of a big deal. I mean, you get a call on a Friday night when you're supposed to have a night off, and someone's begging you to come in and cover a shift. You come and do it, and you end up getting spat on. And it's like you show up the next night because you're there for your mates and you're there for the company. Right. And I think that's sometimes a piece that's missing. Sometimes, especially with big business, I mean, it's something that we're exploring at the moment. I'm actually running a research project myself on workplace violence and establishing a best practice for the management of workplace violence. And there are now big companies that are looking at this particular issue. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, the only feedback the staff get about workplace violence is when they respond incorrectly. So when they've antagonized a situation or there's bad PR, then they'll get a reprimand for reacting to it. But no one was there to support them the 15 other times it happened and they didn't respond.
Yeah,
So
that's right. Or even the fact that they've avoided an enormous situation by, incredible de-escalation,
yeah,
and they've managed to
yep.
walk someone out, shake their hand, and that person walks down the street, which otherwise could have been, a potential someone knocked unconscious. It could even, in the worst case scenario, be a death, and they're not thanked for that on a day-to-day basis. And the thing that that we take pride on is the fact of the matter is that it's the things that you don't recall, and it's the things that that venue people don't see, customers don't see it, even venue owners from time to time won't see it, that are actually resulting in the safer communities. Because I've faced it for many years, and I'm sure you're the same, is that when nothing's occurring, or it seems like nothing's occurring, people go, well, there's not that much for security to do, when in fact the reason nothing is occurring is because that security team are working very, very hard constantly.
No, that's the eternal business battle of security, is that you
It
can't
is.
prove.
Yeah.
How do you quantify what didn't happen, or
Yeah,
what
that's
would
right.
happen had you not been there? And actually, going back to the door, I remember complaining, or just sort of jokingly complaining to one of the bar girls at a venue that no one gives us tips when we do a really nice eviction. Like, no one ever said, "Gee, you're
Yeah.
really gentle about that. Here's $10." Like, no one ever
Yeah.
does that.
Yeah.
So, and then she, for a while, actually started sharing her tips with me, because she said, the only
Oh
reason
wow,
I'm
that's
getting
so
tips.
cool.
Yeah, she's like, the only reason I get a tip is because you guys keep me safe enough that I feel like I can actually
Yeah.
give service, because otherwise I'd be telling them to go
Yeah.
after themselves as well. It's only because you guys are here, so you guys deserve some of my
Yeah.
tips, which is pretty cool. But
Yeah,
but
that's great.
it's hard to.
Look, it really is. I think one of the other things that we do with our community engagement as well, and something that I forgot to touch on before, is that we have an opportunity, dealing with predominantly 18 to 30-year-olds in a lot of places, and even the lower end of that age bracket, to have positive interactions and positive influences on these people. And one of the things that I do is run a program called Think the Drink, where I go to a couple of high schools in the local area, prior to schoolies, and in a no nonsense approach, I talk to them about how to be safe at schoolies. I'm not going to, blow smoke up their ass and say don't drink and don't do drugs and don't have sex with strangers, because we know that that's going to occur. It's all about a real person telling stories, as we've done, about their experiences, and really engaging with people. And when I go to the schools, there are 17-year-olds there as well who may turn 18, and a lot of underages go to schoolies also. But it's really taking that front foot in education and engagement from the outset. That's absolutely essential.
Yeah, man, and you never know what that interaction is going to mean to somebody. I mean, what's day to day for us might be a very pivotal moment in that person's life.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I feel like I've got you on just to plug my book, because all these stories are flooding back.
No, it's fine. But that's great. No, I'm going to buy it. You've done a great job.
But there's a quick story in there. This girl that told me that I saved her life, and I couldn't for the life of me remember what I'd done. And but as she explained it to me, there was a particular night, I barely even remember it. I remembered it after she explained it to me, but she was someone I'd seen before. She was incredibly intoxicated, very depressed. She had just written herself off, and I initially went over to evict her, and I realized that something wasn't quite right, and I spent a little bit of time talking to her and managed to get her into a cab and send her home. And it was a nothing incident. Like, it wasn't even an eviction, because I just talked her into maybe it's time to call it a night. And she actually came back and told me that she had planned to kill herself that night, and that she was basically getting herself written off, so she was brave enough to do it. She'd broken up with a boyfriend, all this stuff was going on, and she was going to top herself. And it was because I took the time to actually care for her and spend 5 minutes talking with her that it made her not make that decision. And that absolutely floored me, because for me, that was just my job. Like, I just didn't want to have to drag her out. Like, I just knew it was going to look really bad. So I just decided to extend a little bit of empathy her way. But yeah, that saved her life.
It's
And
incredible, isn't it?
we just don't know. Like, you just don't know how your interaction with somebody is going to make that much of an impact, especially
Mm.
when they're in a vulnerable state.
Well, it's
Yeah,
an interesting point, and I think it kind of gets the heart of the heart of the issue in a number of ways. And if I can just use your point and kind of pivot the discussion a little bit, is that when I was out at Voyager's Ayers Rock Resort in Yulara, one of the things that we did with the security guards for a while they were offering it was a mental health first aid course. And there's a lot of improvement required in terms of public policy relating to alcohol-fueled violence and how it's dealt with. And, the thing where we've got this 3-week course relating to security operations, but a lot of it is very dry. And I think if we were able to teach guys to engage just as you did, in that kind of scenario, we'd definitely get to the heart of the issue on far more occasions. And I think I'll move on in a second, but I think, because there's some other stuff I'd like to say about policy before we do go. But I think that would really, really be beneficial if more people knew how to deal with that, again, because it's not a violence-related situation as such, but you've had an outcome that's resulted in saving someone's life.
Yeah, it's certainly not the way you expect to save someone's life.
Yeah.
Oh, man. There's maybe a couple of occasions where I've thought I was saving someone's life and maybe did or maybe didn't, but it's certainly not the one you expect because you kick someone out and put them in a cab rather than let them go home on their own. So, anyway, let's pivot that conversation to what you'd like to say about policy, so that we can wrap up rather than make it a 3-hour show, which at this point it may well be.
Well, look, it's
I said to you offline.
Yeah,
mate, I said to you offline, I said, if we get half an hour and we decide that's enough, we can wrap it up. Or sometimes the conversation's really flowing and might go an hour and a half. And here we are. We've been recording it'll be close on an hour and a half with the edits, and we still go for another hour if we wanted to. So,
absolutely, mate. I'm sure we could just tell stories back and forward all night without talking about any policy.
For the behind the scenes, this is I just went to a seminar with Gary Vee, and he said it's always good to talk about. So for the listeners that are after about the behind the scenes, it's currently 20:10 at night. I'm going to be talking to Gershon Ben Karen at 5:30 in the morning. So hence I'm going to wrap this podcast up in the next half an hour, so that so I can actually get some sleep.
Look, well, I tell you what, I'll make this relatively quick, because
by all means, mate. Make your point.
Because
it's important.
Yeah, and look, it isn't a very long point. It's basically that I think whilst we have seen a significant improvement in alcohol-fueled violence culture across the country through a number of measures, both educational and punitive, but I feel that there is a great weakness in our educational systems in relation to alcohol and alcohol-fueled violence and alcohol consumption. Studies in the 70s pointed to sustained long-term education as a primary factor in the reduction of drink driving. They use television ads, posters, they put it in papers, and this was over the course of a decade. And I think that in this day and age, we actually have again, and it can come back to social media and the 15-second news cycle, and the fact that, because, perhaps right now alcohol-fueled violence isn't at the front of the headlines, we tend to forget about it a little bit. And one of the big failings we have at the moment is that we don't have solid educational policies anywhere when it comes to alcohol-fueled violence, leading us to make these knee-jerk reactions like lockout laws. I mean, there's long-standing, sociological and historical research that shows that alcohol and other drugs, and their relationship with violence are contingent on historical, social, and political contents, relating to that consumption. And I think that if we take more responsibility in educating people as they come up, we're going to get better results. And so if there are any people in government that want to talk about policy, feel free to hit me up. I'll give myself a shameless plug there. I'm not the foremost expert in it, but I'd certainly like to think that, I've got something, that we can add to it. And it is some of the research that I've done. It talks about that we do need a systematic overhaul in relation to education. And that's where it's at, because it's really inconsistent at the moment. People have tried things. I mean, they tried it in Geelong, down there for a short time. But again, it was only a small area. It wasn't done for long enough. And then they turn around and go, well, it's failed. And you go, well, in fact, your sample group was too small and you didn't do it for long enough, because we are trying to incite cultural change here. And the only effective way to do that is to look at it, in a long-term context.
Yeah, that's what a great point to finish on, Tim. And it's such an awesome point. And I completely echo everything you said. That's the only way we change anything is through long-term education. You're not going to, you can never change someone's behavior instantaneously. You might get an individual who's sufficiently motivated by other factors may change instantaneously, but you can't change group behavior or generational behavior in a short period of time. And sometimes it's literally waiting for a generation to die out before a behavior change.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You don't change many races. You just wait for them to die. You work on the next generation to be better. And that's right. Sometimes that's what we have to do. We go, you know what? This generation is lost because we got it wrong. Let's save the ones that are willing to be saved, and the ones that aren't, let's just hope they don't breed and pass it on too much. So sometimes that's the reality of sociology.
That's it is, and it sounds harsh, but it really is. And I think that is one of the common misconceptions that really gets down to the causal factors of the problem itself.
Well, do you want to spend all your resources converting someone who, by the time you actually convert them, is going to live for another 10 years? Or do you want to spend a fraction of those resources hitting up the children and then saving them for the next 80 years? I mean, that's what it comes down to. So
that's exactly
how do you change someone who's lived a certain way for 40 or 50 years if they're not willing to change themselves? If they're not interested, you're wasting your time. You're better off talking to the 10-year-olds and the 12-year-olds and the 15-year-olds who haven't made those decisions yet, and helping them steer their life in the right path. So absolutely, man. All right, look, I'm gonna give you a chance to, if anyone out there that wants to talk to Kurt. I mean, he's a great speaker. He's obviously very knowledgeable and very passionate. If there's someone out there that wants to book you or wants to have you as a consultant, how do they get in touch with you?
Look, if you can call me on 0417 316 365. I don't mind handing out my mobile number. You can email me, which is my preferred method of contact because you're more likely to get a hold of me then. Kurt@bigdogsecurity.com.au. Find us and like us on Facebook as well, Big Dog Security. And we're also on Instagram. I control those pages. So if you wanted to get in touch, if you want to talk about alcohol-fueled violence, if you want to talk about any kind of security consultancy, community betterment, if you'd like me to come and speak at a school, please get in touch with me because it is something I'm passionate about and I'm here to help.
Awesome, man. And just for any venues that might be out there, what areas do you operate in? What areas do you service?
So we operate in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and the Northern Territory. So if you are a licensed venue and you want to find out more about Big Dog Security and best practice approach to licensed venue security, please get in touch with us. Otherwise, if you do just want us to do consultancy, we're happy to do that as well, just to look at your current operation and provide advice around that as well.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. This has been a surprising gem. I really didn't know what we're going to get because I've never spoken to you before, and I hadn't heard you speak a whole lot before, other than a couple of videos on your Facebook Live. So it's mate, I had a ball, and I'd love to do it again. And there's a few things I'd love to talk to you about offline as well, because I think our interests align in a few different areas. So
absolutely.
By all means, man, I'd love to have you on again next season, and we can have a more focused conversation. But I hope there's listeners out there that enjoyed it as much as I did, because it's been a fun one for me.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you very much, Matt. I really appreciate that we could finally get together after about 9 months. And, I know you've got to get up in 7 hours. So thank you.
No problem, man. Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Thank you once again to Kurt. And just a reminder, if you're enjoying this podcast and you'd like to contribute, you can head over to patreon.com/managingviolence. Also, please jump on our social media channels. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube, we're everywhere. Please jump on, give us some love. It really helps us spread the word. Also, we're going to be doing a big push for some reviews on iTunes. We need to get this show in front of some more eyeballs or earballs. Earballs? Ears? I don't know. We need to get more people to listen. So the best way to do that is to review it on iTunes, so iTunes features it. If you enjoy the podcast, please head over to iTunes or Spotify or Google Play, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a review, screenshot it. If you can screenshot it and send it to me at joe@joesaunders.com.au, I will send you a very special thank you gift. So head over, 5-star reviews only, please. Well, that's not true. If you kind of like it, you can also leave like a 4-star review. But I'd really love a 5-star review. Leave a review, I'll send you some swag. All right, that's it for me. I'll talk to you next time. Catch you later. Thank you for listening to the Managing Violence podcast. For more information, to view previous episodes, or to read blogs, articles, and so much more, please check out my website at www.joesaunders.com.au. That's www.joesaunders.com.au. Thank you. Talk to you next time.